How did the Jets get themselves out of this mess? I think they got to turn to Aaron Rodgers, but probably not in the way you're thinking. I'll explain what I mean today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, December 6th, 2023, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. If you enjoy the show and are watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. These things help us out and help other Jets fans find the podcast. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match of up to $100. Well, today we have our weekly mailbag show. Each Wednesday we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. Let's jump right in. Our first question, John, the Jets are once again in the media, not only for being a terrible football team, but we seem to be a laughingstock once again. How did the Jets navigate this and make this a place where free agents want to sign next year? Now, I think that that's a great question because it kind of takes us through the layers of the issues the Jets face right now. The biggest issue is the Jets are losing games. But the Jets losing games is creating all sorts of other problems. It's causing strife in the locker room, which we've seen come out this week with the Zach Wilson situation. I talked about that yesterday, how I'm really worried about this, not so much because of Zach Wilson. You know, there's the story Zach Wilson's reluctant to be the quarterback. I'm not as worried about Zach Wilson being reluctant to being the quarterback. I think he should be reluctant based on everything he's gone through this year. I'm more worried because it seems like there's leaking in the locker room. It seems like somebody's out there maybe trying to hurt Zach Wilson by leaking this to the media. And that's a sign of an unhealthy culture. And that's something Aaron Rodgers himself said on the Pat McAfee show yesterday. So, and this stuff kind of perpetuates stuff. You know, you hear this stuff every couple of years. The Jets are a circus. And it just creates a very negative perception across the league. I mean, is that the reason the Jets have a tough time signing free agents? It's one of them. It's probably the biggest one, to be honest with you. I think all the other factors would go away if the Jets were a better football team. I mean, when you look at what free agents want, first of all, they want money. But I never got the feeling that, like, for most free agents, it's just about chasing every last dollar. If you follow like what free agents do and say, it's kind of like they have an idea, like I want X dollars per season, and then once teams offer that, it's not so much who offers the most. Once teams hit that threshold, the soft factors come into play, such as is this a good team? And I think part of the problem is the Jets essentially have a perception of being a laughingstock across the league, and these things kind of feed into each other. You know, the Jets are a laughingstock because they can't win games, and they can't win games because they're a laughingstock. These are harsh things to say, but this team has not made the playoffs since 2010. The next longest drought in the NFL is 2015. So the Jets have the longest playoff drought in the NFL by 5 years. So how do we fix this? I think part of this is a wins thing, because if you win, the perception of you changes. But I think the Jets all do need to do a lot to change the perception of them across the league. I think it begins with Aaron Rodgers. Now, the first thing I'll say is Jets should not even consider putting Aaron Rodgers on the field this year. That's just crazy. It gets crazier by the week. And, Rodgers has said, like, I'm not going to be 100% if I go back out there. So why would you even consider putting him on the field? I think even if the Jets were in the playoff race, I'd have a tough time putting him on the field because, look, all the credit in the world to him for wanting to come back. Great athletes are great competitors. They're always going to want to be on the field. But, it makes no sense to risk him going forward. And, he even said last week on McAfee that, he was still running at 70% on the treadmill, or he's still putting only 78% of his weight on the injured foot on the treadmill. So, I mean, it doesn't sound like him coming back is a good idea at all. It sounds like he'd be playing pretty compromised. But I'm talking about next year. Now, I think the Jets need to be very honest with Aaron Rodgers. They miscalculated how close this team was to the Super Bowl. And, this team's probably not going to be able to make a Super Bowl run next year. That's just how it is. And I think they need to be honest with them and say, you know what? It's not going to be worth us to trade for Devontae Adams, take on a huge salary for a guy in his 30s. It's going to be, that contract could be an issue with us as he gets older, as he declines. We're not going to bring in David Bakhtiari. You're going to have to make it work. We're going to have a flawed football team. You're going to have to make it work. And football wise, if you look at the quarterbacks who are going to be available, I don't know that there's going to be anybody better than Aaron Rodgers who can work around a bad offensive infrastructure. So, but I think more than that, the Jets need to change Rodgers' mindset, and they need to change their own mindset, because I think the Jets came into the season thinking they had a Super Bowl team, and they rolled the dice on Dwayne Brown, and they rolled the dice on Mekhi Becton, and they rolled the dice that Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb were the only compliments Garrett Wilson needed. The Jets need a lot of essentially. I mean, most of the offensive line needs to be replaced, and most of the receiver group needs to be replaced, and you're not going to do that in one off season. And I think what you'd say to Rodgers is the new goal is let's end the playoff drought, because that alone could change perceptions. Just make the playoffs, you finally have something good to talk about, a good season to talk about. The other thing I'd say is, look, you said this yourself. You said you wanted to leave this team better than you found it. And that's one of the reasons you took Zach Wilson under your wing. And as we know, the veteran quarterback, like 90% is like overrated, probably by a scale of 90%. Like the veteran mentor has probably like 5 to 10% of the utility people think he does. But there are things that you can help teach a young quarterback how to prepare. He can teach a young quarterback certain coverage tips. Rodgers, I think, did a good job with Zach Wilson on some of this stuff. And even though the numbers don't reflect it, I do think there was a slight uptick in Zach Wilson's actual level of performance this year. So I think what you say to Rodgers is, we're going to draft a quarterback. You took Zach, you were willing to take Zach under your wing. You're willing to show him the ropes. Didn't work out there. There's a new quarterback. We're going to draft somebody, and your job is to take him under your wing, show him how to be a professional. And I think more than anything, Aaron Rodgers is obviously an iconic quarterback. And if Aaron Rodgers, helps the Jets, buys into this, and people see that, this great quarterback is making the Jets a better place, and this great quarterback, likes this franchise and really ended his career on a positive note here, because I don't think necessarily at this point, again, the Super Bowl dreams are mostly gone unless any of the 32 teams can go on a run. There are always these wild scenarios that could play out, the 1 in 100 scenarios where, a team makes an unexpected run, but most likely that dream's gone. So I think the measure for success now with Rodgers needs to change. I mean, it's about making the playoffs. It's about changing the perception of the Jets to the league in general. And I think that if people see that, Aaron Rodgers was pretty happy here, Aaron Rodgers helped bring stability. Now they got a new quarterback that they drafted ready to take over. The successor to Rodgers is in place. Maybe that's the kind of thing that could change perceptions across the league. And I think part of the reason that it's important for the Jets to change perceptions is you don't want the young talent on this team to feel like they want to go somewhere else, because if there's enough losing, could you blame Garrett Wilson, especially Garrett Wilson, because he's not getting the ball when he's open? Could you blame Sauce Gardner? Could you blame Jermaine Johnson if these guys wanted to go somewhere else, if the Jets were losing too much, these great young players, when the time comes, when they hit free agency? So I think that next year is about a year. It's a year of establishing credibility. It's a year of changing the perception about the Jets across the league. The Jets had their offseason where they got all the hype, where they were the team that was featured on, the Mike Greenberg Get Up show every day on ESPN, where they were the top story on NFL Network every day. That's what Woody Johnson wants. Woody Johnson always chases relevance. Woody Johnson's obsessed with the Jets being the top story. Well, the Jets need to focus on building a credible football team. And Aaron Rodgers, I think, can play a key role in this, because he's got credibility. He's a guy where when Aaron Rodgers says something, people listen. If Aaron Rodgers goes out in his career on a high note and says, you know what, maybe I didn't get that Super Bowl with the Jets, but I really like what this team built. I really like being part of it. I think that could go a long way towards changing everything. And the reason things need to change is that this is another disappointing season for the New York Jets. We're going to talk about it as we continue this Wednesday edition of Locked On Jets. Just how bad is this? Is this worse than the Tebow season? I hate that we're asking it, but somebody asked it, so I'll answer it ahead here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. This episode is brought to you by Skylight Frame. Are you looking for a meaningful gift this holiday season that your loved ones will actually use and enjoy? Some holiday gifts are very boring to give because everybody gets them. I'm talking socks, candles, slippers, robes, and you're looking to up your gift-giving game this year. And that's why Skylight Frame is a great gift to give to your family. Who is the hard-to-give gift person? Is it a spouse, a friend, a sister, a mom, dad, grandma, a daughter? The most personal and thoughtful gift is the Skylight Digital Picture Frame. Skylight is a touch-screen photo frame that you can send photos to straight from your phone. You can even preload photos before the box is open, so when it's unwrapped and plugged in, your most treasured memories will appear. It's the perfect gift for everyone, especially for grandparents. Skylight is the best digital frame for grandparents, hands down. It's intuitive, easy to use. Your grandma and grandpa will love it. And we're confident you'll love Skylight. In fact, they offer a free 120-day return policy. Over 1 million happy customers, thousands of 5-star reviews, and it's available in over 30 countries. Recommended by the Today Show, Forbes, New York Magazine, and more. And as a special limited time offer for our listeners, get $15 off your purchase of a Skylight Frame when you go to skylightframe.com/lockedon. Again, to get $15 off your purchase of a Skylight Frame, just go to skylightframe.com/lockedon. That's Skylight Frame, SKYLIGHTFRAME.com/lockedon. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And you should know that Locked On has launched the first ever 24/7 national sports streaming channel on YouTube. It's Locked On Sports Today, and it's here for you 24/7, covering the top news stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever 24/7 national sports streaming channel. And today on Locked On Jets, we're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question, John, which season was more of a disaster, this season or the 2012 year with Tebow? Do you think Woody Johnson learned anything from that season? If you recall, the end result was John Idzik and Rex Ryan. Well, that's a tough question to answer. It's a tough question to answer because I don't like the question. It's nothing against you. It's a very fair question. I just hate the fact that we're even pondering this at this point of the season. Do I think Woody Johnson's learned anything? I don't think Woody Johnson's learned a thing in his 23 years of owning the Jets. I mean, I don't think if you look at the way the team's been run, it's not gotten better. If anything, like the Jets were actually pretty decent the first half of Woody's run. He's gotten worse. I don't know why he's so much worse, but he is worse than he used to be. Is this worse than 2012? Well, it's interesting because the Jets team that's on the field right now is really not all that different from the Jets team that was on the field last year when the Jets fell apart down the stretch. They fell from 7-4 to 7-10 and ended the season on that 6-game losing streak. But this feels worse, and I think a lot of it feels worse than a lot of bad Jets seasons. The reason for that is I think the Rodgers trade, because I think expectations were so high after that deal. Jets fans thought that this team could go to the Super Bowl. Even I wasn't like a huge believer that the Jets were a Super Bowl team, but you want to believe. You talk yourself into anything. I think even if you weren't a big fan of the Rodgers trade, by opening day, no matter how bad the Jets look, you've talked yourself into some scenario where the Jets can be good. And this year it felt more realistic because you could at least come up with a scenario where Rodgers was going to be great. It had like that feel of 1999, and the reasons for that are obvious. Jets lost their quarterback in 1999 to a torn Achilles the first game of the season. So, kind of history repeating itself. I think this is worse. I think that all of this is worse. I think part of it's that you've got this really good young core. In 2012, the team just wasn't very good. I mean, 2012, I know people wanted to believe in Sanchez, but there was a lot to doubt about that team heading into the season. This year, the Jets have one of the best young cores in the NFL. It's like they're wasting it. And it's like they're risking wasting it for their entire, Jets careers, because now they've traded these draft picks away. They've cut away a lot of their future cap flexibility. There's just a lot right now that's ominous about the future of the team. So it's one thing when the Jets were losing in the Todd Bowles era, because it's like no matter what they did, they weren't going to be very good. Here the Jets were not that far away from having a really good football team, and they made this they made this deal, and it's it hasn't worked out for some reasons, not their fault, like Rodgers going down 4 plays into the season, but it's just tough. It's tough because I think I think the expectations more than anything are what make this season so much tougher than everything else. I think that's really what makes this a more difficult situation than 1999. Next question. The Jets are famous for wanting offset language in rookie contracts to our chagrin. Did we get that contract? Did we get that language in Zach Wilson's rookie contract? Does that mean we will get cap relief if he is released in the offseason? What is the cap hit if they do jettison him? Yeah, so the Jets got offset language in Zach Wilson's contract. And if you're not familiar with offset language, players either have offsets in their contract or they don't have offsets. And what an offset does is it takes the team off the hook if they cut a player and the player signs a new contract with another team. So essentially what that means is that because Zach Wilson has offsets in his contract, if he goes and signs with a new team after he's cut for like $1 million, that's $1 million less the Jets need to pay him. Essentially, so if Zach Wilson signs up with a new team for $500,000, the Jets would owe him $500,000 less. If Zach Wilson signed with a new team for $1, the Jets would owe $1 less. That's how these offsets work. Now, as I said at the time, and this also happened with Sam Darnold. The Jets, I don't know what it is. The Jets are obsessed with getting offset language into rookie contracts. And I always say it's kind of silly, because it's not something you should keep your prized quarterback draft pick out of training camp. And why do I say that? Well, Zach Wilson's base salary for 2024 is just over a little over $1 million. So at most, the Jets would be saving $1 million against their cap because they only owe him $1 million next year. Most of Zach Wilson's cap hit is bonus money. So the bonus money doesn't factor into offsets. Only the base salary factors into offsets. Base salary is $1 million. That's the most you're saving. So when I go crazy when the Jets do something like keep their rookie first-round quarterback selection out of training camp over offsets, that's why I go crazy. Because at the end of the day, you're saving $1 million in a league where the cap's like $220 million. It's not worth fighting over. So it doesn't really save the Jets a whole lot at the end of the day. How much do the Jets save against the salary cap if he's cut? Well, they save nothing because his money's all guaranteed. So Zach Wilson's cap number for next year is $11.1 million, almost $11.2 million. That's all dead money if they cut him. There's no cap relief if they do it. And that's one of the reasons, I think you may have Zach Wilson on the team next year because there's no real benefit to cutting him. Now, could he be traded? That might be a different story. If the Jets can get a late round pick for him, I think that might be something they consider. But at the end of the day, we're not talking about much in the way of financial relief if the Jets move on from Zach Wilson. As a first-round pick, and especially as the number 2 overall pick, his contract is all guaranteed. And when you talk about cap savings, the cap savings whenever a player is cut, and this is true of pretty much every player in the NFL, the cap savings come from money that's not guaranteed to them because you're not paying them that money anymore. The dead money is money that's been guaranteed, or in some cases, the money just hasn't been accounted for against the cap. So that's where we talk about cutting a player when it saves you money. It's when you don't have to pay the guy any more guaranteed money. That's really what it comes down to. Now, you're on the Locked On Jets podcast. Well, we just talked about Zach Wilson, but we're going to turn our attention to the backup quarterback spot more broadly. Why did the Jets struggle so much to find a decent backup quarterback? I have some thoughts on that, and I'll tell you what they are as we continue this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. And with basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, you can take LeBron and Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made in receptions. And if you want to play alongside some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Hill and comedian Andrew Schultz, you can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, that's PrizePicks. This episode of Locked On Jets is sponsored by FanDuel. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. Again, that's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. Again, $150 for a $5 moneyline bet. So maybe you think this is the week the Jets end their losing streak against the Houston Texans. You're even getting points. Texans 5.5-point road favorites currently right now at FanDuel. This game has an over-under of 32.5. The over-unders just keep getting lower for the Jets. And even then, I'm still not sure I love this 32.5 over-under. That's a lot of points for a game involving the Jets offense and the Jets defense. But no matter who you pick, if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and kick off the NFL season. Again, it's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday. We're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question is about the backup quarterback position. So far this year, we have witnessed Josh Dobbs, Gardner Minshew, Tommy DeVito, Jake Browning, Joe Flacco, and others come in as backup quarterbacks and play well, sometimes even winning. Why is it so difficult for the Jets to identify and sign a backup quarterback when other teams routinely do it? All right, so I have a couple thoughts on this. Number one, I wouldn't overstate what some of these guys have done. I mean, anybody's capable of going in and playing one good game. We saw Mike White do that a couple of times. So, I don't know that any of these guys are going to be able to carry a team through a full season like the Jets would have needed this year. I do think the Jets have done a bad job with the backup quarterback spot. I think that that's undeniable. I think that's been true since Joe Douglas has been here. But I think you also can't ignore the role the supporting cast plays in the success or failure of a backup quarterback. At the very top in the NFL, you have your quarterbacks who are great, who can make it work with anybody, who are going to lead an offense to success, pretty much no matter what the supporting cast is, within reason. Your Patrick Mahomes types, your Justin Herberts, your Joe Burrows, Josh Allen. And some of these guys may have a bad year. Some of these guys may be injured, but for the most part, these are your go-to guys. These are the guys who they can lift up a bad supporting cast. There are not many quarterbacks in the league who can lift up a bad supporting cast. Most quarterbacks are kind of the products of their surroundings. Now, again, you have the guys at the very bottom. You're Christian Hackenberg kind of guys. You're Tim Boyle kind of guys. Doesn't matter what their supporting cast is. They're not going to look very good. Most quarterbacks are probably somewhere in the middle. It's a sliding scale. There's some quarterbacks who are closer to the greats. There's some quarterbacks who are closer to the bottom. Most quarterbacks are generally going to be a product of their surroundings. So the issues with the Jets, they're about bringing in the wrong backup quarterbacks, but they're also about having bad supporting casts. If you can't block for a backup quarterback, he's going to get sacked. If if you don't have good receivers who can get open, they're not going to have success. That's why Nick Foles could win a Super Bowl with the Eagles and look so mediocre at so many other stops. One of the names you mentioned in the question was Joe Flacco. So why can't the Jets have a backup quarterback like Joe Flacco? Jets had Joe Flacco the last 3 seasons. He did not look very good. Now, again, that goes back to, I think, the supporting cast. And I think actually Flacco's performance on Sunday was a bit overrated. But what can Flacco do? Look, he's a veteran. He knows how to set the protection. He knows how to see what blitzes are coming. He knows how to find his outlet receiver if there's a free runner. He knows if he stands in the pocket, he knows how to read the defense and deliver the ball where it needs to go. What he can't do is move at all. And you saw that last year with the Jets. The Jets could not block for him at all, so everything was a check down. If you're going to make it work with Flacco, you need a great offensive line. You need receivers who can break open, so he's not going to check it down because he's, at this point of his career, he's a little afraid to throw balls into tight windows. This is the same guy the Jets had last year. You were saying he looked so good with Cleveland. Part of it's the supporting cast. A big part of it's the supporting cast. So I think that's where you look. I think that's the truth. Is part of it's a failure of the Jets. I mean, we know they should have done better than what they did this year at backup quarterback. Why was Tim Boyle on the roster? Let's leave Zach Wilson out of it. Who thought Tim Boyle was a rosterable quarterback? That's tough for me to understand. So I don't think you can say that the Jets should be completely absolved of this, but it's also they just have not put good supporting cast around these backup quarterbacks, and that's why they fail. Last question, one word about the future of the New York Jets. I'm going to surprise you. I'm going to say hopeful. Now, look, I don't know. I know it's tough to say, and I know I've been saying this for years, but at some point the Jets are going to be good again. You can't be bad forever. You can be the laughingstock of the NFL for decades and turn it around. Prior to the hiring of Chuck Noll, Pittsburgh Steelers were the worst run franchise in the NFL for their entire history for decades. They were the laughingstock of the league for decades. We've seen this cycle in the same city with the Giants go over and over. The Giants have these stretches where they're terrible, yet they've bounced back and won Super Bowls. The Saints, I think they had one playoff win in their history before they hired Sean Payton and signed Drew Brees. The Jets will eventually get it right. The Jets will eventually reward your faith. I know it's tough. I mean, it hasn't been fun. It's been an awful year. It's been awful 13 years. It's been an awful lifetime for a lot of Jets fans with a few moments of joy sprinkled in, but just be hopeful. Jets will turn it around at some point. It's going to get better. It may not feel that way right now. It may feel very frustrating. That's understandable. But at some point, the Jets are going to get the right people in here. maybe Woody Johnson sells the team at some point. Maybe he figures it out. I mean, sometimes awful owners do figure it out. I mean, I'm not hopeful of that, but at some point the Jets will turn it around. It's really difficult to stay bad forever. The Jets make it look easy, but it is hard. Even if you're not even if you have the best people at the top in ownership, at some point you eventually will stumble into something. So I don't know when it's going to be. I mean, I hope it's next year. I hope it's not much longer, but at some point the New York Jets will be a better football team, and at some point you'll really enjoy watching them. And just keep the faith until you do. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. These things help us out, help other Jets fans find the show. Hope you have a great Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.